Resident Evil has a long history of downloadable content, from map packs to story expansions, and there are some which rise above the norm and carve their own niche as a separate experience, which we never knew we needed. And then, there are others which do the exact opposite. When Shadows of Rose was first announced during Capcom's E3 event in June 2021, it got my attention. Village, in my mind, ended Ethan's story quite cleanly. The only question left was where the story was going to move to with Resident Evil 9, and would Rose feature in that? Learning that this DLC would give us time with Rose to learn her character and what she's capable of sounds like everything I'd want. But after finishing it, I'm coming away from the experience feeling kind of hollow. Now, across this review, I'll do my best to explain what the game does right and the many issues that hold it back from its true potential. As always with my reviews, I'll be breaking this down into plot, gameplay and presentation. And don't worry, I'll make it very clear when I'm about to go into spoilers. Now let's dive in. Shadows of Rose is set 16 years after the events of Resident Evil Village, with the events of the DLC taking place just before the epilogue of it. The game opens with Rose meeting Kay on a park bench. Kay is a member of Chris Redfield's Wolfpack. Now, what starts as a normal check-in conversation on how Rose is adapting to school and making friends quickly turns into an opportunity for Rose to make a serious life change. It turns out that Rose is having a tough time. Out of all the potential super abilities, mold powers aren't exactly a dream come true. Being a living bioweapon, especially in a world where multiple cities have been obliterated thanks to bioweapons, ain't exactly a great time. So when she's offered the chance to potentially get rid of her abilities and have a normal life, she jumps at it. Kay informs us that a fragment of the Magnamycete is held in the lab, and as Rose has a connection to it, she theoretically can enter its network and find the cure that she seeks in the form of a purifying crystal. Early into the adventure, Rose meets a spirit who reaches out to aid her on a journey. She jokingly refers to it as a guardian angel, settling on the name Michael, and it's in the dialogue between Rose and Michael that propel the story forward. And this is aided by file pickups which help to shed light on Rose's past, the struggles she has fitting in, and how she yearns to belong. Shadows of Rose is essentially a tale of self-acceptance, but at only 3 hours long, it doesn't do enough to create a feeling of emotional attachment. You learn why Rose feels the way she does, but I didn't connect with it. And there's many reasons for that. Now, length isn't the sole culprit. Games like Journey are 90 or so minutes, and by using its time wisely, it is able to resonate with the player. Here, in Shadows of Rose, its 3-hour runtime could have been spent on reliving past events that have shaped Rose, where we could experience what she's gone through, how traumatic starting school after a life raised in government captivity is, how cruel kids can be to someone who's different. But instead of slowing down and delving into the nuances of the character, it puts this vital information into a handful of text documents. And so we know why she feels this way, but we don't empathize with it. Instead, the game uses its time to essentially be a greatest hits of Village, with the story imposed on top. Now, I'll delve more into the gameplay in that section and how that fares, but sticking to the plot for now, the DLC had a chance to try something completely fresh, to give us a character-driven experience which would leave us wanting to see more of Rose in the future, to feel for her, to care about her and the choice that she makes at the end of the game. But in finishing it, I felt indifferent. It was cliché, and to me, felt like the team at Capcom took the easy way out when it came to setting and storytelling. Now, I'm going to move this into spoiler territory to really flesh out why the story didn't connect with me. Follow the timestamp above if you're keeping this spoiler free, or I'll do a wrap up before we move on. Now, I'll give you a few seconds before I delve into this. Oh boy, now the gloves are off, where do we begin here? First off, the game makes no sense. We find out Miranda's consciousness has been trying to find a way out of the Magnamycete for 16 years. She wants to bring her daughter back, and so she uses the influence of the mold to project a copy of Kay to convince Rose to enter into this world. Okay, I buy that. But then why the hell didn't she just meet Rose when she enters and hand her the crystal, drain her powers, and kill her frame one? Why make her go through this entire gauntlet where she'll get powered up before then taking it? And speaking of, why is the Duke even here? Was he infected by the mold?
I don't know, Jeff, has he? I must have missed that.
If I'm being kind, and we say he was created by Miranda to serve her, he ain't doing a good job if he's trying to kill the real one. For God's sake, he had Rose imprisoned at one point. Instead of trying to off her, he could have shouted for Miranda to pop up and end it there and then. Now, if it's the case that Miranda needed a fully powered up Rose to bring her daughter back, and she didn't want a failed copy to get hold of the crystal and foil her plan, then I can understand the Duke's role in testing her. But then why put a fake copy of the crystal there? Surely, if she's gone through all this and got hold of it, she's the real one. Let her have it, for God's sake. Now, I'm not normally one who lets this kind of plot hole bother him. Hell, I was even able to gloss over the fact that Village could have ended in 5 minutes when Chris tells Ethan that he didn't shoot the real Mia. But here in Shadows of Rose, it's so blatant. And the more time I spend thinking about it, the dumber it becomes. Putting that aside, why doesn't Ethan say, "Oh, it's me, Dad," when he first shows up?
Who are you? My guardian angel? Do you have a name? If you're an angel, then... Gabriel? Michael?
Honestly, who the hell played this and didn't realize it was him immediately? What I don't get is who does this twist serve? For us as a player, we see through it. And for Rose, she misses out on the chance to have deeper conversations with her father, to get the bond that she longs for. And that's robbed from Rose because Ethan decides that it's best she doesn't know. Honestly, I know this is Resident Evil and I shouldn't expect more, but I do. In 7, I cared for Jack Baker and the family. I felt for them. And if that's possible, it should be easy as hell to make me care about the daughter I spent the whole of Village trying to protect. It's like as if the game purposely undercuts its emotional impact. They say the eyes are the windows to the soul. It's in the eyes we get to see emotion on someone's face. It's the reason why in superhero movies the mask is removed at every possible opportunity. So when we finally get Ethan and Rose together, what does Capcom do? They go out of their way to obscure his face. Now, I get the gag that Capcom have been pulling since RE7, but this is the time and place where they should have showed Ethan. Let us see these characters have a true interaction. Let us read the emotion on their faces. But no, like most of this story, it's surface deep, where at best, it doesn't make sense, and at its worst, fails to convey its intent. To summarize this section, the Shadow of Rose DLC had an opportunity to deliver a story of self-acceptance that had potential to catapult the Resident Evil franchise into fresh new grounds, and instead, they squander it on a plot which defies logic at every turn and fails its characters by relegating important character moments to file pickups. The old adage of show don't tell is incredibly fitting here, and if they'd followed this method, I would have been able to walk past the glaring issues the plot has, as the journey we would take with Rose would be meaningful. But as it stands, the plot underserves its characters, and in turn, squanders its potential. Shadows of Rose sees us take on 3 distinct environments taken from the main Village campaign, but it wisely shakes these up to feel distinctive. Beginning in Castle Dimitrescu, we get a cut-down version of the mansion, whereby Rose needs to collect 3 masks to slot into a statue to progress. The antagonist on this section is the Masked Duke, a warped version of the Duke we meet with Ethan, and here, his goal is to inflict suffering, and this suffering comes in the form of face eaters, who rise up from the goop which covers most of the surfaces in the game. If you walk on the goop for too long, you'll meet your demise, so it's important to clear this out to reach your next destination. This is where Rose's powers come in. By finding a bulb, Rose can focus her energy and destroy it, which in turn cleans up the environment. It's used throughout the entire experience, to solve puzzles or to open up an environment during combat. As the story progresses, Rose's power set grows, and you're then able to use these powers on the enemies themselves, causing them to be paralyzed for a quick evade. I was worried going into this that Shadows of Rose would give the player too much power, that we'd end up acting like Alice in the W.S. Anderson movies, but that's not the case. Capcom made some welcome changes to ensure everything is balanced out. For starters, Rose can't block, meaning each hit will deal considerable damage. She moves slower than Ethan and Chris, and the resources across the environment are limited. Now, in saying this, I never found myself short on anything in particular. In fact, I had ample bullets and heals throughout my entire playthrough, but that could be due to how I use Rose's abilities and my avoidance of combat where possible. Old habits die hard, and if I can skip a fight, I'll skip it. For me, the resource I was most concerned with is Rose's powers themselves. A bar on the bottom right shows how many stuns you can unleash. These are refilled by white sage plants found across the environment. It's so handy to stop a group of enemies in one use of the powers that I never wanted to find myself without them. And so, when I racked up a bucket ton of bullets, I was more inclined to pump them full of lead rather than use my powers in those situations. It's all choices. You could approach these encounters in a myriad of ways. Run, stun, or kill, and that's up to you and the resources you have at your disposal. There's not a right or wrong way, and that moves over to the crafting. Village gave us a fantastic crafting system, and here in Shadows of Rose, it returns. Here, you'll find chem fluid, and by combining this with a herbal gunpowder, you can choose to have heals or bullets. The crafting is substantially reduced from the base game, leaving us with heals, shotgun, pistol, and pipe bombs. But that felt like the right amount given the shorter experience. And I feel the same way as I did when I played through Village for the first time. I appreciate the choice of how I use my resources, and living with the consequence of said choice when it's far too late. Now, there's a couple of changes in the general gameplay from Resident Evil 8, which do have an impact to varying results. For starters, there isn't a merchant. As such, this means enemies don't drop resources. This one simple change opens the door for an avoidance playstyle, which is familiar to any old school Resi fan, and that probably explains why I didn't have an issue with resource management on my playthrough. But for those of you newer to the series or unfamiliar with the older entries, this may be something that you need to adapt to. The other change is one that does take away from the experience, and that's its linearity. Resident Evil as a series generally has a few cornerstones: resource management, puzzle solving, and exploration. Two of those three are here, but without exploration, the game does lose a lot of its shine. There's no risk and reward in going off the beaten path because there isn't an option. It's follow this route, grab item, solve this puzzle, come back here with item, destroy a few bulbs, and move on. And that's it. Now, I'm not saying this is a bad formula. In fact, the 3 odd hours it took for me to complete the game flew by. The pace doesn't really drop, and you're not in any one environment for long enough to feel like you're missing out. But I couldn't help but shake the feeling that I was being guided down a set path without any variance, and this could make further replays a stale experience. Now, I said at the start of this section, there's 3 different environments taken from the main game of Village. I've spent most of this time talking through Castle Dimitrescu, but the standout by far, just like Village, is House Beneviento. The feeling in the base game of entering the house and seeing it warp into the stuff of nightmares, while you're left with none of your items to defend yourself, is one which has stuck with me since I played it on its release. Here in Shadows of Rose, this experience returns.
I like you a lot.
As soon as I realised where I was, I expected Shadows of Rose to try and recapture this experience, but I never thought it could somehow exceed it, and it does. Now, I'm going to cover this in spoilers, so feel free to skip ahead here. Children's games. why are they always so terrifying? Hide and seek with a bunch of giant dolls was one thing, but playing red light, green light with a goddamn mannequin? Not being able to see where you're going? Having that nagging feeling that something is behind you, and then when you turn to check, you see the mannequin move towards you looking like it's animated from a Harryhausen flick. Talk about tension. I was cacking my pants. And then they up it by adding in 2.
Perfection.
If the rest of this game had the same imagination poured into it as this section, this DLC, regardless of plot issues, would be essential playing. House Beneviento stands tall as the highlight of the game, both for raw scares and for its shake-up on the gameplay. What you need to do throughout is simple, but in how it's delivered with its sense of scale and raw fright, makes the rest of the experience feel bland in comparison. Now, going back to Rose's abilities to close this section, would I have liked to have seen more uses for the powers? Possibly, but the issue then is how much it would take away from the core experience. Would it still feel like a Resident Evil game if they moved too far away from what came before? I could argue this both sides, and I'd love to hear from you in the comments on this one. On one hand, this is the perfect excuse to break the formula and try something completely fresh, but then again, it's in this universe, and even if it is a dreamlike state of consciousness, I wouldn't want it to become a power fantasy where Rose is ripping enemies apart like they're nothing to showcase just how much of a monster she can become. I think the approach Capcom have done here with fusing new elements into a condensed RE8 experience was the right one. And even if the game doesn't provide the same depth that the base game offered with its exploration, it does enough here to justify its existence. When Village released on the 7th of May 2021, it was clearly the best looking game on the Xbox Series and PS5. It's been a long time since then. Returning to it after all that time, it's still drop dead gorgeous. From the ambient main hall in Castle Dimitrescu to the dank depths of the dungeons below, every environment is spellbinding. The only part that shows a bit of age are in the characters themselves. Now, don't get me wrong, they look great, but there's something about Rose's loose strands of hair and facial capture that don't sing like it used to. Seeing the footage for RE4 Remake, I don't have any concerns with what the RE engine can accomplish, and if anything, I'm excited to see how far Capcom can push this engine. Where the game exceeds is in its sound. As Shadows of Rose has quieter moments, it gives the player the ability to soak in the atmosphere each individual track creates. Not only do we get the low synth-like tones present in the main game, which ramp as we encounter enemies, we now get a host of themes which stand above the atmosphere. Themes like Hide and Seek and Eclipse are ones which broke through as I took in my surroundings. Now, the 3D audio is the same as the base game, and Capcom absolutely nailed it in this department. From the squelches of the goo to the blast of a shotgun, the soundscape brings the environment to life, ensuring full immersion into the experience. And this is the same for the performances. The cast do an exceptional job, with the standout being Aaron LaPlante as the Masked Duke. He manages to fuse the Duke's regal and psychotic traits into a captivating performance which demands your attention, giving a different take to the character we encounter in the base game, and one which towers above the rest. And speaking of different takes, I'll move over to the environments themselves. Going into this DLC, we knew we'd be entering the mindscape of the Megamycete, an ancient entity which has absorbed the consciousness of potentially thousands of individuals over a millennia. This gives the team at Capcom an infinite number of directions they could move the DLC in. We could see different timescapes, new locations, or a host of original characters to interact with, but no. For whatever reason, it's a repeat of the same locations and antagonists from the base game, but with a different coat of paint. Now, I understand it's a DLC expansion. They don't have the same budget as a standalone release, so maybe this is more on me and my expectations going in rather than a slight on the game itself. But surely, they could have added in somewhere that felt unique, that felt truly out of this world compared to what we've seen before. I like what they've done with the village here, don't get me wrong, but it's just missed potential. And that missed potential sums up the enemies and bosses too. Over the course of the game, the main enemy type are the Face Eaters, and they are essentially Dementors from Harry Potter, except not as threatening and they can't fly. To go with those, we have an Executioner enemy, which is a reskin of the guys we fought in RE5, and that's it. In a world where anything is possible, due to it being a metaphysical plane of existence, you could go wild with these designs, something that never could exist in the wide world of Resident Evil. But no, they played it safe. They are different, sure, but they don't feel unique. Boss-wise, it's the same bag. We get 2 encounters which are retreads of those in RE7 and RE8, just played slightly differently. They weren't enjoyable and added very little challenge to the overall experience. Shadows of Rose is a mixed bag. As much as I enjoy retreading through familiar environments with a new lick of paint, there's something missing that would have elevated the 3-hour runtime into something that would invite me back in for another run. The story is riddled with issues where the main emotional punchline is undercut with sloppy execution and a tell, don't show mentality. The only redeeming factor here is in the gameplay, which stays true to the Village formula, with additional abilities to help keep the experience fresh. With additional time to flesh out Rose's backstory, a brand new location, and an interesting antagonist, this could have been a must-play. But instead, it goes down as a failed experiment, where Capcom played it too safe and ultimately underserved its true potential. There's moments of greatness here, but unfortunately, it settles into mediocrity. And that's it for this review. If you enjoyed it, put a like on it and subscribe to the channel for more Resident Evil content. Now, I try to respond to everyone on my channel, so comment your thoughts on the game and we can discuss it. Up next on the channel is a review on Dead Space Mobile before I turn my attention to the Callisto Protocol, and I look forward to seeing you back here soon. Now, if you're still craving a little bit more from me, consider checking out my podcast, In PS We Trust. It's a PlayStation podcast where we cover all the latest news, rumours and hype for all things PlayStation, and I'll have links in the description. Thank you for watching, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, see ya.